when we talk about transitioning from linear to circular economy, you also said that we have to talk about this systemic change.
Yeah.
Meaning what?
So let's first define the difference between linear and circular economy, if you don't mind. So linear is that we use something, so resources, then we produce something, and then we throw it away, and we don't care. In circular economy, we start with thinking, do we need to produce something? If the answer is yes, then we think about the design, how to design it in a way that this product can last for as long as possible, so that we repair, reuse, refurbish, name it, and at the very end, recycle it. So that is the difference. And now if we go to the businesses, the question is, how are we going to change our business model? Because if we want to implement that, that is the question. So I would say that there are different entry points for that, and there is not only one recipe. And what we do with the businesses is that we do a kind of a scanning to see, okay, their business process goes this way. Where are now those entry points that are allowing us low-hanging fruits so that we do something very fast and implement, and what is more long-term? So we have different kinds of these business models. Maybe we will figure out that we have to change the supply chain and maybe refer more to the local partners. Maybe we will figure out that we can move from product to service so that we don't produce something, but that we actually rent that. Or maybe we will see that we can extend the life cycle so that we design the phone in a way that we just change the components like Fairphone does. So there are different approaches. And why we are talking about systemic change, because when you start this journey, you figure out that all of a sudden you have different partners, different suppliers, different stakeholders that contribute to your new business model. And therefore it's not an easy thing to do, but it can be very joyful.
So if it's, I don't know, in one proposition, in one phrase, the systemic change, what is it?
The systemic change is the change where you consider different parts, you know, that you do not focus. I will take a metaphor. So you do not focus on the tree, but you see the forest. And then you understand how the system of the trees is connected. So you will not treat only one tree, because you have the awareness of the whole forest and of the system that links those trees that they flourish.
Okay, so that would mean that systemic change is about multi-stakeholder involvement, something like that.
So multi-stakeholder involvement. It is about interdisciplinary approach. It is about stepping out of your silos. If we are talking also about the government, as I mentioned, it cannot be the topic that is related only to the Ministry of Environment. It is really related to the whole government. And in the business, in the company, it is not something what the person in sustainability department will take care of. It is about the core of the company. And what is important for businesses is also that KPIs, so those measures according which the success of the business is measured, are aligned with the principles of sustainability and circular economy.
Maybe a question here for businesses would be, okay, if systemic change that I want to contribute to, I don't know, one problem that is important for a company, like biodiversity or plastic pollution or whatever, if it involves so many actors, such as civil society and the government and other businesses, then how can I actually contribute and be part of the systemic change if I can only influence
a certain amount of stakeholders?
Yes, around me.
First of all, you are already a part of the system. Because as long as you think, oh, my business, or even I personally, I'm part of the system, I'm part of the society. And each business is part of the bigger systems. As I said, you have suppliers, you have customers, you have regulation there, it's already there. You maybe just are not aware of that. So it is a mindset shift towards that you are on the playground with more actors already right now, but now how to collaborate even more effective and efficient with them to contribute to this not only systemic change, but actually transformation in the sense of sustainability. And
that's very interesting because probably companies are already doing stuff
very
and
often.
They just don't know that it's circular, it's sustainable. So maybe this is the key point, the mindset
shift. And also it is very often that they do not know who are the potential collaborators just in their neighborhood maybe, or in their society, but they're not aware of that they can start doing business together. And when we work with the companies and we put them around the table, to say so, and we think, oh, they're from the same region. But after 1 hour, we realize they didn't know how they can collaborate in a more circular and sustainable way. And then they start doing that, and this is this low-hanging fruit. Something is already there, but they're not even aware of the potential of collaboration.
Interesting. You also mentioned about the circularity gap report from last year, and for example, in Romania, in that report, circularity is about 1%. In Europe, okay, it's a little better, 11%, but I've seen that it's lower than a few years ago in 2018. So what I've noticed is that the trend is not actually moving upward. And since we have this goal of becoming fully circular by 2050, I'm wondering if you have any optimism on this matter, or any hope?
I wouldn't say I am optimist by nature, but here I'm quite realistic and critical sometimes. Because on one side, yes, we have everything, as we said, reports and guidelines and everything already in Europe, the legislation and so on and so forth. On the other, we are facing things like war, and now even with Draghi report on the competitiveness of Europe, it was clearly said that we should invest more in innovation and research. I agree with that part, but I hardly agree with the part of investing into the military industry, which is not clean, green, and circular at all. So while we are facing these wars and everything what is happening and investing money in that as well, then this is not very much aligned with our ambition and our hope. So, but I wouldn't be, again, too pessimistic and say, oh, nothing can be done, because for the business has this intention to survive, as we humans do. Also, the entrepreneurs have this mindset. And once you realize that you will survive by shifting towards circular economy models, then you will go in this direction no matter what the legislation is saying or what is happening on the ground. Because if we come back to the resources, to the inputs for the businesses, when you realize, oh, it is cheaper for me to use something what is already there. So if I produce, I don't know, washing machines, and I collect them and reuse the elements, components that I can still integrate into my new machines, and it is cheaper than buying material on the, I don't know, Far East markets or wherever, then you will go in this direction. So, and this is the circular direction in a way. So here I see that businesses will follow the way, and also for the region, I would say the industry went out of the Europe. But for Romania, you got very strong industry as far as I know, and now to revitalize it in a more sustainable and circular way, that is great opportunity for Romania and for Europe as such, because industry as such is okay. You just shouldn't pollute, and it shouldn't make people die because of bad air or something. So here I see the hope.
Okay. You said that it's cheaper in some cases, but in other cases it's not. It's more expensive, at least the initial cost to make the transition from linear to circular. So if there is not a certain regulation, a certain law that is mandatory for companies, many of them are just postponing the transition. So what would you say to a company that doesn't have to comply yet with a mandatory law and sees it as too big cost in the beginning?
Let's be realistic here as well. So what we are facing now with all the reporting, with ESG, taxonomy, everything, sometimes it is too much for SMEs, because they hardly survive and they say, oh, now I have to employ someone to report, and this is not the purpose. But as we said, we are learning by doing, and even for Europe, I'm sure that we will adopt this reporting in a way that will be more useful, so that it will support businesses to go in the right direction, not to be another burden for them, you know. So the second thing is taxation. So as long as we have taxation that is not encouraging those companies that are reusing, refurbishing, recycling, and so on, they will not do that. And if I take one clear example about right to repair that we talked about, so if it costs me more to get my shoes repaired than to buy a new pair of shoes, then I'm not interested to do so. So here we need incentives and clear message also from the, as I said, taxation or subventions or whatever, that we will do this first step towards this direction and then it will become a mainstream again. But it works hand in hand, as I mentioned, this network governance, so what we can do as stakeholders on the ground and the public governance. And this dialogue is very much needed because it is carrot and stick, you know. We need both, but we have to agree on that, what is not killing us, but what makes us stronger.
I have one last question, but yeah, it was a nice coincidence. Okay, so let's say a company is convinced, okay, I have to do it, I believe in it, I have the money for it. What's the first step? How can they start?
How can they start? So if they have already the idea, they should think about that. Who are the experts? Because it's very often that you need external experts, not that I'm promoting that, but as we said, it is a systemic approach, different kind of knowledge is needed. And then to find people who can support them in this stage so that they move forward. I will take an example of the company Aquafil that is producing 100% recycled nylon, because we worked with them and they started. So first, their basic industry is producing nylon from oil. But then the CEO, who is a passionate diver, decided that he would like to save the sea and to collect the fishing nets. And they started to collect the fishing nets and the carpets and producing nylon that is 100% recycled. So, but they needed, as you said before, completely different partners for that, because all of a sudden they started to work with fishermen who were collecting the fishing nets from the sea. They figured out, oh, they're on Philippines, so we should go there and teach them. And then they figured out, oh, there are animals that are trapped in those fishing nets. They started to collaborate with the London Zoo. So the experts from London Zoo came to Philippines to teach those people how to rescue the animals. You can see that the business that was very linear in a way, they bought oil and they produced nylon, all of a sudden started to collaborate with experts from the zoo. So that is what happens on the way. That's why you never know what kind of journey that is going to be, and you should be open-minded and also open for a collaboration that you were not used to. Mm-hmm. So that is the stepping out of the comfort zone. But when we talk to the businesses, the reward afterwards and this excitement about discovering something new, and also the price you achieve on the market with this new product gives you then the confirmation that it was worth starting, no matter how strange or unknown territory it is at the beginning.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
You were very nice in explaining.